Hi guys, it is me, Shelly. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. So let's go ahead and dive right into the video and let's get started. So I made this semi-naked cake for a friend of mine. She got married right before Halloween. She wanted something very simple and that didn't have a whole lot of buttercream, so she opted for a semi-naked cake. Do you remember when semi-naked cakes were a thing several years ago? It became very popular and it trended everywhere. Everyone wanted a semi-naked cake or a naked cake because it looks so rustic and beautiful, elegant, and simple. People still really like to have semi-naked cakes or naked cakes at their weddings. Not only does it look rustic and beautiful and simple, but it also showcased a baker's skill. It's really important that when you're making a semi-naked cake that you don't have any flaws. Like, your cakes need to be legit. They can't have any cracks, they can't have any tears, they can't have any pieces missing. It's really important that your cake layers are nearly flawless. When you're making a regular cake, if you have a crack in your cake, you can cover it up with buttercream, but you can't when it's naked. And also you don't have the added support of the buttercream holding your cake together if there was a crack in the foundation. So I wanted to share some of my tips and tricks with you guys on how to achieve a nearly perfect semi-naked cake. So when I started baking, I got a lot of my help through Google and YouTube search, but I had a really hard time finding videos to help me bake on propane ovens. I live in a very small town. We don't have hardly any houses with natural gas. So a lot of these tips that I'm going to share with you are all about trial and error to help alleviate your stress. I had to throw away so many cakes because I had to learn how to work on a propane oven. I also live by the mountains, so our elevation's a lot higher, so it could be a lot harder to bake up a cake. A quick lesson on propane 101 is that propane runs a lot hotter than natural gas. So it can be very easy to overbake your cakes. However, propane also runs in tanks and it sits above the ground. So as your tank goes lower, it could have a hard time passing through your pipes and keeping your oven at a constant temperature, which means that your oven might not stay hot enough to bake your cakes properly, and you might struggle with your cakes sinking in the centers. It also might depend on the weather. If it's really cold outside, your pipes are gonna run cold and it's gonna be harder for the propane to run through your pipes and heat up your oven and keep a constant temperature. So on the day that I was baking up these cakes, I already knew that my cakes were going to have issues rising properly. Even though they are smaller cakes, I decided to bust out my flour nail to help me bake my cake. The flour nail acts as a heating core to help prevent your cakes from sinking in the centers. So I'm not exactly inventing the wheel here. I'm sure you've seen this in other videos, but this is just something that I use to help me when I'm baking on low propane. And this was just to ensure that the cake rose perfectly in the center and didn't sink in the middle. Typically, I use a flour nail whenever I am baking a 10-inch cake or larger, but in this case, I knew that it was gonna work well on an 8-inch cake. Since I did use a flour nail, my cake baked up a lot quicker than it would normally. But since the nail is inside the center of your cake, you can't really use the toothpick method to check if your cake is fully cooked or not. So the best way to tell if your cake is fully cooked is by the scent of the cake. Usually my nose tells me when the cake is finished because it tends to smell very sweet, but also because the cake will pull away from the sides of the pan and you'll know that the cake is finished. And you'll notice that your cakes won't have a dome as they rise. They'll kind of rise kind of flat. But if you do, I like to avoid cutting the tops off my cake. So I'll use a piece of parchment paper and my fondant smoother to kind of flatten off the tops while it's still hot. And I'm talking about when you first pull it out of the oven and it is piping hot, and this helps level out your layers so that they're even all the way around so that you don't have to cut off the tops and you still get a really nice height on each layer. And let me just remind you that no cake is going to be perfect. You're going to have times where your cake is going to be a little bit lopsided. It's nearly impossible to achieve a perfectly symmetrical cake. When it sits overnight, it's eventually going to shift and it's going to condense. There's nothing you can really do about that. So don't worry too much if your cake isn't perfectly leveled. Don't stress out about it. It's still going to look beautiful, and the person that you're making it for is going to absolutely love it. Just remember that you are your own worst critic and only you are looking at all of your flaws. I did bake this cake 2 days prior to her wedding, and what I do is I bake it the night before I want to start decorating. So I'll wrap it twice in saran wrap, put it in the cake pan, cover it in foil, and let it freeze overnight. And I'll do this right when the cake is just about room temperature, but still a little bit warm in the center. That's how you keep the cake moist. Putting it in the pan will help it from warping and staying round. A lot of people use simple syrup, and so do I, but whenever I'm making a cake like this, where I know it's gonna be eaten just a couple of days after it's baked, there's really no need for simple syrup. Simple syrup is usually used, in my case, whenever I'm making a cake that I'm gonna bake a few days or more prior to serving the cake. So now we're gonna talk about filling and stacking your cake. Usually, using my spatula, I'll just put a thin layer, but in this case, since it's gonna be a semi-naked cake, I used a piping bag to fill in my cakes. And this is just so that you get an even coat of buttercream all around and helps keep your cake as symmetrical as possible. And the easiest part of the semi-naked cake is that all you need to do is basically crumb coat your cake. So you're just gonna ice your cake like you normally would. You would just put a thin coat on there and scrape off as much as you can and leave some buttercream left behind, and this is how you achieve a really nice semi-naked cake. So now I'm just going to show you how I stack my cakes. You want to make sure that the cake has plenty of support, and with that I use support straws. I had these straws left over from some treats that I made for my sister's coworker, so I'm just using these. I thought they would fit nicely because they have flowers on them. And I really like to use straws over dowel rods. I feel like the centers that are hollow work better, but you could also use dowel rods or even skewers. That might help as well. And I use 5 of them to be exact for a round, and 1 dowel rod down the center. And when you're cutting the tips off, you just want to pull it up slightly, snip it, and then push it down with the other side that you broke off or you cut off, and you just stick it directly into the cake until it's flush with the icing. And the reason why we use these straws is to help not only support it, but it keeps the cake from sinking too far into the cake. When your cake does shift or it starts to sink down a little bit, your cake will hit the straws and not fall into the center of your cake. My favorite method for putting the dowel rod in the center is to measure how tall your top cake is and then put it directly over the straw or over the dowel rod, and this will sit directly on top of the cake, and it works perfect every time. The next thing that I like to do, because we're not putting borders on this cake, is to put at least some lace around the bottom of the cake. And to attach the first layer of my lace, I just use a little tiny dab of buttercream, and this just makes the lace adhere to the cake. And to give it some contrast, I go over it with some rustic looking twine ribbon, and this will just kind of make your cake pop a little bit. To adhere that, I do put a little pin in the very back. Just make sure when you deliver the cake that you make sure to tell them that the pin is there, but that's why I like to use the pin that has a little round pearl at the end. That way it's easily seen in case you do forget to tell them. And there you have a really beautiful 2-tiered, simple, semi-naked, elegant cake for any wedding, and you could dress it up any way you'd like. You could add herbs, you could add flowers, you could add berries, you can add anything that you would like to this cake, and in fact, she did that herself. You could also go a step further if you really wanted to, and you could add shimmer dust to make it look a little bit sparkly. I have been asked in prior videos how you would package up a 2-tiered or 3-tiered cake before. I have mentioned it on this channel before, but I have not actually shown you how I make a box. Let's go through with how I make the box and how I package it. So basically act as if this was your board that you're going to cut into a box. This would be either your bottom or your top. You're going to cut them exactly the same. You're going to make your center into whatever inches your cake board is. So if you have an 8-inch cake board, then you're going to put an 8-inch square here. If it's 10 or 12, doesn't matter. It has to have the size of the cake board. Then you're going to want a 3-inch border because these are going to be your sides. So you want a 3-inch border. So you're going to do 3 inches, 3 inches, all the way around. And then after that, you're going to cut the cut line. So you're going to keep this flap open. You're just going to cut it. You're just cutting a line here and here. So these are going to be your side walls. I take a large poster board from the Dollar Tree and I measure out my sidewalls first. I measure 3 inches for the flap and then 10 inches for the sidewall and another 3 inches for the other flap. Then I do the same thing on all 4 sides. Then you'll match up all of the lines and you'll be left with 4 sidewalls, 4 smaller squares, which are your flaps, and the center, which is the same as your cake board. After you're done measuring, you can cut out your entire box. Make sure your measurements are accurate, otherwise your lines won't be even and your box will be lopsided or won't even connect all together. Next, you'll want to score all of your lines. Doing this will make sure that your poster board folds easily and nicely. I use the point end of a weeder tool from the Crafter Square section from the Dollar Tree. Now just start folding your sidewalls. If your folds need a little help, you can use the flat end side of your weeder tool. Now make your cuts on the inner side of your sidewalls. And then you're going to want to pull your sidewalls and your flaps up and connect them together with a piece of tape. Now that you made your bottom box, now you're going to want to make your top box exactly the same way. To connect your boxes together, you'll need to create 4 posts. With my leftover poster board, I created 2-inch strips and then I folded them in half vertically. I use my Cricut cutter to cut them into strips and then I use my weeder tool to score them in half. And all you need to do is connect each post into each corner of your box. Now all you have left to do is to put your top box over your post, and then I just use some cellophane wrap to wrap up the windows. And now you have a perfect box that will fit any size tiered cake. You just adjust it accordingly with the measurements of your cake. I hope these instructions were easy to follow and easy to understand. So alongside the cake, I made some cupcakes to go along with it. I did take footage of it, but I decided to keep it out because it didn't really fit this video. Maybe I'll make a short video on how I made the pics. If you guys are interested in watching that, please let me know. But she was very floored when I delivered the cake and the cupcakes. She loved everything. She thought everything looked beautiful and it fit perfectly with her wedding theme. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys being here. If you guys have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. I'm sure I missed something or I didn't explain something to the fullest. So if you have any questions, please leave me a comment down below. Please also share this video if you find it worth sharing with someone who might benefit from watching. Consider subscribing if you're new here. I have plenty more content just like this for you guys. And that will be it for me today. Again, thank you so much for watching. Please always remember to shine bright and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.